The aim here is to destabilize the regime, weaken its standing, weaken its credibility, with a view to some sort of change happening down the line, whether that's in 6 months or 6 years.
Let's talk regime change in Iran. And before we go into sort of whether it's likely to happen, I just want to know, in your mind, what would regime change look like? Like, how is it determined? And are we just talking about a change in sort of supreme leader, or is there far, far more to it than that?
I think this is the biggest question that's never asked. People talk very glibly about regime change, and it's just one of those phrases that's latched into the public consciousness, particularly since obviously the Iraq War, where the designated aim of the invasion of 2003 was to get rid of the regime of Saddam Hussein, and so everyone just says, "Oh, well, that's what regime change is." But it's just a phrase, and different countries have different systems of government, and they're entrenched in different ways. And if you want your adversary in a geopolitical standoff to change the way it runs itself, there are many different ways of achieving that, and there are many different forms a regime change operation could take place. And the thing about the Islamic Republic in Iran is it is not a one-man show in the way that the Saddam Hussein regime was, where you could just go and take out Saddam Hussein, and presumably his two sons, and say, job done, now let's reestablish the state. Not that anyone managed to do that successfully in Iraq, but that was clearly the aim. Similarly, we've had Syria, where the aim was to get rid of the Assad family and his henchmen, and again we've seen that. But so you can talk about regime change there. But what would that look like in a much more considered form of government like the Islamic Republic? I mean, we may not like it, but it has its systems. It has a elected parliament. It has a presidency and a government and cabinet ministers who have a variety of views and functions like any other government. Then sitting behind that, you do have this clerical regime led by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, but he is a successor appointed after some sort of procedure, not a very clear procedure, from his predecessor, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic. If you say we want to change the regime in Iran, it's understandable that its adversaries want to do that. That's what adversaries want to do. With other countries would like to see different governments put in place in Britain and America, and but how does that happen? Can you just remove the clerical aspect like that and then leave an elected, functioning parliamentary, presidential system? Not clear that that's particularly easy to do. I mean, the clerics will still be there as a religious society, maybe less religious than it was, but there's a strong religious element. Those Imams will still be there. They'll still be offering their opinion. Will they be ignored if you remove the one supreme leader? Then what about the Revolutionary Guard? They have their own systems in place, self-promoting. It's an army, but it's also a social force. It has a domestic policing element in the Basij. It's kind of unofficial police force, militia. They are connected to ordinary police as well. How you can extract these elements from Iranian society, and whether you want to try and do that, or do you just want to, more likely, in my view, the aim is to influence the regime, to alter its behavior, weaken the personal authority of Ali Khamenei, the very hardline supreme leader, and shift them into a position where, when he dies, whenever that is, he's 86 now, more amenable voices will take his place. I mean, that's one possible outcome. I think the goal of this operation is not regime change. I do think the goal of the operation is to substantially weaken the personal authority of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and to damage the reputation of the Revolutionary Guard. So I think I called it Republican Guard earlier, Revolutionary Guard, um, um, uh, as a sort of master force standing behind the regime.
There were suggestions, weren't there, that that Donald Trump vetoed the killing, the assassination by Israel of the supreme leader when they may have had an opportunity to do so. Isn't his end to the benefit of the US as well? Why would Trump have done that?
I personally, and I may be a minority voice on this, think that we have to take such claims with a huge pinch of salt. There's a massive spin operation been going on since Trump was elected into power in terms of his relationship and the relationship of the incoming U.S. administration and its relationship with Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister in particular. It serves both sides' interests to say that Trump is acting as a restraint on Netanyahu, both in Gaza and in terms of Israel's wider policies in the Middle East. Trump was elected on a basis of ending the wars in the Middle East, of MAGA, Make America Great Again, America First. And that is in conflict with the Republican Party's traditional strong alliance with the Israeli establishment, particularly the right of the Israeli establishment, like Netanyahu. So there's a conflict there, which it serves Trump's purpose to slightly disguise. It also serves Netanyahu if he's able to keep the cover of America for his actions while saying, "Well, I could go much further," nod, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If only Trump would give me the go-ahead and present what he's doing in terms of that dynamic. It doesn't serve him ill either. It gives him quite a lot of freedom of movement to say, well, it could be much worse. I could be much worse over Gaza. I could be much more aggressive over Iran. That sends a message to Iran that be careful, because if you irritate us all, then things could get even worse for you. Could Israel have killed Khamenei? Would it be in its interest to do so at this point? Not entirely clear. As I say, regime change has many features. If you just decapitate the top man, as was shown with Saddam Hussein, you're never quite sure what's going to come next. So it's pretty unknowable. Trump and Netanyahu both think they've got Iran on the back foot. That would introduce a measure of unpredictability. Would the Revolutionary Guard take over and immediately hurry to make a nuclear weapon? I mean, I think with the regime there, with the Ayatollahs there, with Ayatollah Khamenei particularly, who has specifically said he does not approve of or want Iran to build a nuclear weapon, you may feel safer doing a deal with the devil you've got.
If they did, though, decide that regime change, however they decide they want that, is the way forward, now must feel like the time to make it happen. I mean, extremely damaged proxies for Iran, little regional support, humiliated by the Israelis. They do appear weak right now.
They do appear weak, but having said the comparison with 2003 and Saddam Hussein isn't straightforward. I mean, that is in the background of everyone's minds. To invade a country and take out its leadership does have a lot of knock-on consequences that you can't really plot out, and may not be for the best. So Trump himself made this strange comparison recently, which oddly mirrored something I was just saying to someone else, that the only previous example where a regime change has happened purely by bombing, not by series of popular protests over time, internal collapse, or invasion, like with Iraq. The only previous case you can sort of look back on is the bombing of Kosovo and the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, when that did ultimately lead to a crowd surrounding the presidential palace of Milosevic in Belgrade, the Serbian stroke rump Yugoslavia leader, and say enough. And he went quietly and was eventually put on trial. I mean, that's not a great if you're Khamenei, that's not a great precedent. But it's important to note that there was no direct link, no direct sort of join between the bombing campaign and regime change. It wasn't that the Americans bombed the Serbs into, chucking out their leadership. The Americans bombed Yugoslavia into withdrawing, or Milosevic or Serbia into withdrawing from Kosovo militarily, and then what was left of Yugoslavia festered and became upset and angry with the humiliation of what had happened and general dissatisfaction with what Milosevic had done to their standing in the world and their country, and they got rid of him. Now, I think that's much more. I mean, if this is what Iran, the US and Israel are thinking of with Iran, that would be much more in keeping with precedent, and also looks much more like what they're doing in a sense. If you look at Trump's messaging to Iran, it isn't "we're going to come after you." It's not like George Bush in 2002, 2003, and his people saying we're going to come and get you, and you have to surrender, or we will come and get you. There's a lot of mixed message being sent, which to create this sense of uncertainty in Iran. You saw Trump overnight tweeting to the population of Tehran, saying you must evacuate your city. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, I just want people to pause a little bit and just say how extraordinary that is. I mean, we live in an extraordinary world, but the idea that an American president is sending out through social media a one-line instruction to the 10 million residents of a capital city on the other side of the world, they all have to up and leave, or an unstated consequence will happen, is extraordinary. But it does add to this sense of chaos. You've seen the photographs, the film overnight of the videos overnight of the Iranian motorways absolutely packed with cars, tail to tail, as they all try and flee. Who knows where they're going, but trying to get out of the city. That sense of instability, that sense that is I think the aim is to engender a feeling of this, whatever this is, it can't go on much longer. We may survive this current war with Israel, but can we go on accepting these rounds of sanctions, these crises, these wars, these bombardments? Something has to happen.
If it's not sort of a bombing campaign, as you suggest, I mean, one of the ways that this might happen, I guess, and certainly if you listen to Benjamin Netanyahu, is a sort of rising up of the Iranian people against the regime. When I thought about that, I kind of thought, I can't imagine there's much appetite for a coup amongst, regular people when there are bombs raining down on their heads. I mean, there must be an anti-Israel feeling for many there, even if they also have anti-regime feelings too. It must be a very complex sort of internal battle for the regular people of Iran.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, again, I would caveat this. One of the problems we have when talking about other countries is we have this thing of using the name of the country or even the capital to represent the views of the whole people. I mean, people do it themselves as well. I mean, I've spent a lot of time working in China, as you know, and often people there say, what people there when I'm there say, what does China think about this? What do the Chinese people think about this? And indeed, the government there says the same. It says, the Chinese people think this, and you're thinking they're 1.4 billion people. The idea that they all think the same is crazy. And popular opinion in non or semi-democratic countries is a very difficult thing to gauge and say, because not because people don't think the same as we do. It's just that they are thinking in a different context. So I was try and remind people, when we have opinion polls in Britain, we know what people think because we have opinion polls every month. We ask the same questions over and over again. You can see whether support for the Labour Party or for capital punishment or for which country you want to go on holiday to changes over the years. And it's in a context where people are being asked their opinion the whole time, and every 4 years or 5 years they have to go to a ballot box and say, is it the Conservatives this time or Labour, or do you want to go with the Scottish Nationalists or the monster raving leading party or whatever? So people are used to these very clear-cut political decisions. In these countries where you're not being given a choice over the broad thrust of your regime, you have much more complex views. You have just as many views, but they're not. You never have to make that choice. So you never have to make the choice in Iran. Do you want the regime, or do you want to be more like America? You probably want a bit of both. You probably want to be a bit like America in some ways, and a bit like the regime in other ways, and people have different views on that, and it won't be a clear-cut thing. I think there is a strong minority of people who really would take the streets, and we've seen that in the last few years in Iran, who would take the streets and get rid of the regime right now if they could. There's equally a strong minority of people who actually want to protect the regime and particularly don't want an American or Israeli-backed regime change operation. There's obviously a lot of people in the middle who would quite like the regime to go, quite like things to get better, quite like more personal freedoms, quite like to be able to go to America more easily on holiday, or have American investment in their firms. But on the other hand, they don't really want the turmoil that that might come about if you try and bring that about. I think a lot of people have said, if you want to bring about regime change, bombing the country is the worst thing you can do, because no one's going to go out and take to street demonstrations in Tehran if it's being bombed. And sure, I totally agree with that. But as I said before, I don't think the aim here is to bring about regime change tomorrow. I think the aim here is to destabilize the regime, weaken its standing, weaken its credibility, with a view to some sort of change happening down the line, whether that's in 6 months or 6 years. I think that's if I were a Israeli strategic planner, that's how I would be thinking. How Trump thinks, who knows? One can't be entirely sure. But I think that's much more the sort of parameters that they're thinking.